In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural magma lava material. And if you'd like to purchase this procedural material, you can get it with the links in the video description. So after I show you how to create the material, I'll show you how to join it together into this custom node group so you can customize the look of the material. So I'm just going to go through the material settings. So we have the scale, so you can change the size of the entire material. And then we also have this lava visibility. So if I turn this way down, you can see it just looks more like rock. Or if I turn this way up, you can see most of it's going to be the lava. Or you can just have like the lava just coming out in a few little spots here and there. We also have the emission strength, so you can make the lava stronger and make it brighter, so it's going to be more like a yellow and it's going to glow more. And then we also have two different colors for the lava. So color 1 is going to be more orange, but you could also make it more yellow if you want to. And then color 2 is a very red color. Then we also have just the roughness of the lava. Then we have the lava bump strength. It's a little bit hard to notice, but there is a little bit of bump on the lava. And then we have some different texture settings. So we have the distortion value, so you can kind of distort it. We also have the detail value, so you can have more and less detail. We also have this texture roughness value, so that's definitely going to add more detail. We also have this lacunarity value, so if I turn this up, you can kind of see how the lava looks, pretty cool. And then also this distortion value, so that's kind of going to distort the texture more. And then we also just have a few settings for the rocks. So we have the rock color, which is kind of like a lava rock, so you can change the color here, so you can make it like a brown or a red. Then we also have the roughness of the rock, and then we also have the rock bump strength. And then finally we have a displacement strength, so you could turn off the displacement if you don't want to use it, or you can add just a little bit of displacement to kind of pop the material out of the mesh. So if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase this procedural material, you can get it with the links in the video description. And if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials, you can check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my materials, and they're all pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And you can also purchase any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist. So first I'll show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I have. So I just went to the add menu and I added an icosphere, and then right behind me on the add icosphere settings, I just turned the subdivisions to 6 so it is smooth and round, and I will just use the object context menu and shade it smooth. Then I'll scale the entire object down to like a 0.2 so it's a better size, press Ctrl A and just apply the object scale. So then I also just added a camera and just pointed the camera at the object. And if you select the camera and open up the side panel, go to the camera settings, I turned the focal length up to 80 just to kind of zoom it in a little bit. And then I also went to the output properties and set the format to 1920 by 1920 so it is a square image. And then I also added a few lights here. So I added this big area light right here. So go to the add menu, go to light and add the area light. And then on the area light settings, I turned the shape to disk. I left it as a white color and I turned the power to 20. And then also this light here, this is similar. So I just duplicated it and put another light back here. So we have like a main light on the front and then we have another kind of rim light on the back. And then I'm also going to be adding in an HDRI. So over here on the world properties, I added this Machine Shop 02 1K HDRI from polyhaven.com. So the link is in the video description if you want to download it. And again, I downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version from Polyhaven. So once you download the HDRI, you can click on the yellow dot next to color and choose environment texture, and then just click on the open button and open up the HDRI. And then also if you go here to the render properties and scroll down, you can open up the film tab, and I just turned on the transparent button just so that you can't see the HDRI in the background. And then also here on the color management, I'm using the view transform of Filmic, and I set the look to very high contrast. Now I am also going to be doing some compositing later to add like a glow effect, but for now I'm just going to turn off the real-time compositor here in the viewport, and then we'll be doing the compositing after. So you can click over here to go to the shading workspace. So I have the 3D viewport right over here and the shader editor right over here. So I'll just select the object and let's click on new to add a new material, and I can just call this magma lava. And then also one thing that I want to do, because we're going to be adding displacements to this, is I want to add a little bit more geometry. So I'll hit Control 1, and Control 1 is going to add a subdivision surface with 1 level. However, this is going to add a lot more topology to the object, and the object is already pretty detailed. You can see if I go into edit mode, it's pretty detailed, but I do want a very detailed mesh so that the displacement looks detailed. So here on the subdivision surface, I'm going to turn the viewport and render levels just to 1. And then also I'll be using the Node Wrangler add-on in the video. So if you don't have that enabled, you can click on edit, you can go to the preferences, and then go to the add-ons tab, and you can just search for Node and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on. So let's first start by creating the lava material. So to create the lava, I'm going to open up the emission here, and I'm going to turn the emission strength to 5. So now it is glowing. And here on the color, I can just start by making kind of an orangey red color. But now what I want to do is search for a noise texture, drop this here, because I want there to be some parts which are more red and some parts which are more orange. So I'm going to add a bit of variation to the color. Now with the noise texture selected, I'll hit Control T to add the texture coordinate mapping, and let's use the object coordinates to plug the object into the vector. And then also this setup is going to get a little bit complicated. It's a little bit large. So I'm going to keep my nodes nicely organized by adding frames. So I'm going to click and drag to box select these two nodes, and I'll hit Control J to join it together into a frame, and I'll select the frame and press F2 to give it a label, and I'll just call this mapping. So I'll just drag this up here. So now here, let's continue to create the lava material. So I'll just preview the noise texture and let's change the settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to 40 and I'm going to turn the detail to 6 and I'll turn the roughness up a little bit to a 0.7. So we get that pretty cool detailed texture. So I can put the factor into the color and then let's preview the principled shader. Now I want to actually change the colors to make it orange and red. So what I'm going to do is search for the mix color. We'll drop it here after the noise and the factor can go into the factor. So now we can make the two different colors for A and B. So I'm going to make like a very reddish orangey color for A, and for B I'm going to make a very red color. And then also let's take the base color and turn it all the way to black so you can't see the reflections as well. And if you do want to use the exact same hex values that I'm using, you can punch in this hex value right here on color B. And then if you want to use the same one for color A, you can punch in this hex value. Now you can see it's not very contrasty. It's a little bit hard to tell the difference. There is like more red parts and more orange parts, but I want to make it more contrasted. So I'm going to add a color ramp and put this between the noise and the mix. And let's drag the black value out and drag the white value out. And you can see when they're closer, there's going to be a lot more contrast in the colors. So I'm just going to drag those out there, and that looks a lot better. Now what I also want to do is add some surface bump. So let's put the factor into the normal, but then to convert this to normal data, we need to add a bump node. Drop this here, and let's just drag it down. We want to put the factor into the height value to convert to bump data. And then I want to make this less strong. So let's turn the distance to a 0.005. So you can kind of see we have a little bit of surface bump there on the lava. And then you could also turn the roughness down if you want to. I'll leave it at 0.5, but this will also be a custom value which you can control. All right, so that is it for the lava material. So let's just box select all these nodes, join them into a frame, and then add a label, and I can just call this lava. So now what I want to do is create another group of texture, which is going to be more that rock material. So I'm going to search for another principled shader. Let's preview the principled shader, and I want to add some bump to it. So we'll add a noise texture, and we're going to use the same object coordinates. So take the mapping vector and put that into the vector of the noise. Let's preview the noise, and I can change the settings. So I'll turn the scale to 100, and I'll turn the detail to 10, and I'll turn the roughness to a 0.6. So now what I want to do is add it into a bump node to convert it to normal data. So we'll add a bump node and we'll put the factor into the height value, and then the bump normal can go into the normal of the shader. And let's preview the shader, and it's way too strong. So let's turn the distance to just like a 0.1. So it's a bit more subtle. And then I want to add kind of like a lava rock color to the base color here. So this is the color that I'm going to be using. And here's the hex value if you want to punch in the same color, but it's basically like a really dark red. So it's kind of a dark reddish brown. I'm also going to turn the roughness here to a 0.6. And let's take this distance and we'll make it even a little bit less strong. So I'll turn this distance value to a 0.02 instead, so it's a bit less strong. So that is it for the rock. So I'll box select these nodes, add them into a frame, and I'll add a label, and I can just call this rock. So now we have these two different materials, but what I want to add is displacements to pop out the mesh, and then I also want to kind of mix the two materials together so it looks really cool. So in between the lava and the rock, we're going to add some more textures here, and we're going to be creating kind of like a mask to blend between the rock and the lava. So to do this, I'm going to search for another noise texture, and let's just preview the noise texture. We can also add the vector into the vector of the noise, and I'll change the settings. So I'll turn the scale to 12, the detail to 10, and the roughness up to a 0.8, so it's pretty detailed. And now what I want to do is distort the noise texture. So I'm going to add a Voronoi and put the Voronoi here after the noise or before the noise, and I'm going to put the distance into the vector. So now I can change the settings of this Voronoi. So I'm going to take this value and turn it to the Chebyshev, and then I'm going to turn the scale up to like a 20, and I'll turn the detail up to 10, so it's pretty detailed. And this roughness, I'm actually going to turn it down a little bit to like a 0.3, so it's a little bit smaller. Now you can see that is like way too distorted, so I want the Voronoi to have less of an effect over the noise. So to do this, we're going to search for a mix color, and we're going to drop this between the Voronoi and the noise, and what we're going to do is mix between the object coordinates, which isn't distorted, and the Voronoi, which is distorted. So we're going to take the Voronoi distance and put that into color B, and then we're going to take the vector here and put that into color A. And on the mix type here, let's change this to the linear light. So I can now drag the factor up and down, and you can see at 0, it's just the noise, but then as I turn the factor up, it's going to be more and more distorted. So I'm going to turn the factor value to a 0.02 so that it's just a little bit more distorted. Now I want to be able to see the texture better, so let's make it more contrasted by adding a color ramp. We'll put it right here, and then what I want to do is drag the black tab and also drag the white tab out a little bit, so it's something like that for now. I'm going to adjust that a little bit more later, but now what I can do is use this to mix together the lava and the rock. So let's search for the mix shader to mix two shaders together. So we're going to take the rock and we're going to put that into the top shader, and then we're going to take the lava and we're going to put that into the bottom shader. And now let's preview the principled shader. So you can see as I drag the factor, we're just blending between the rock or the lava. But if I take this color and put that into the factor, now you can see some parts are the rock and other parts are the lava. So I can kind of drag this around to control how that's going to look. Now what I'm going to do is hold down the control key and click here to add another tab. And this tab I'm going to make really dark, but not fully dark. And if you want to use the same exact color, you can punch in this hex value right here. So it's 353535FF. And so you can see where the gray parts are, it's going to be kind of blending in between both of them. So you can kind of see there it is. So it's kind of an even blend between two of them. And then I'll have the white one, which is like the lava, and then the black one, which is like fully rock. So you can just kind of play around with this to basically blend between the lava, the rock, and then also kind of this spot here, which is kind of in the middle. Now we're getting a really interesting texture. Now what I also want to do is add this into the displacements. So let's add the displacement node. We'll drop this here and the displacement and go into the displacement of the material output. And I can put the color ramp color into the height value. Now it's not actually working. That's because we need to open up the side panel here and click over here to go to the materials. And we need to go to settings and surface. And on the bump only, we need to change this to displacement and bump so that we're telling the material that it can use the displacements. Now that's way too strong, so let's turn the scale down to a 0.02, just a 0.02, so it's not quite as strong. Now there is a problem with this, and that is if you look here on the edges, there's like all these spots which are really choppy, and so what I want to do is make this more smooth. So what I want to do is use the same noise texture, but we're going to turn down the detail a bit. So if I select the noise texture, let's hit Control-Shift-D. So Control-Shift-D will duplicate the node but keep the wire plugged up, and I'll put this factor into the height value. And then what I can do is also search for a color ramp and drop it here between the noise and the displacement. So now you can see it already looks a bit more smooth, but I want to change the noise settings so that it's a bit more smooth. So what I'm going to do is take this roughness, and instead of 0.8, I'm going to turn it to 0.5. So if I preview this noise texture and preview this noise texture, you can see how much more detailed this one is, but it's better when using a displacement. It's better if there's not quite as much detail. So you can see here it is before and here's after. So this top noise texture is going to control mixing between the rock and the lava, whereas the bottom noise texture is going to control the actual displacement. So now if you look here on the edges, you can see it's definitely popping out of the mesh, but it's a bit more lumpy and that looks a lot better. So now let's change the color ramp settings. So I'm going to drag the white tab here and the black tab here, so we're going to switch them, and I'll put the white tab about there and the black tab kind of to about there. So now we get these little dark spots here, so where the rock is kind of coming out, it looks like the rock is popping out, and the lava is going back in a bit. Now later on in the custom node group, I want to be able to control kind of how the lava looks. So what I'm going to do is search for a hue saturation value, and I'm going to put this between this noise texture and this color ramp. So drop it there. And now we have this value which I can drag around. So if I make it lighter and darker, that's going to add more lava or less lava. So we'll be using that later in the custom node group. So let's just box select all these nodes, join them into a frame, give it a little bit more space here. We can add a label to this, and I'm just going to call this lava texture mask. So that is it for the procedural material. So let's join it together into a node group so we can customize the values better. And then I'll also do some compositing. So I'm going to click and drag to select all the nodes except the material output. And I'll hit Control G to join it together into a node group. So let's hit the tab key to outside the node group, and I'll drag the node group right over here. Let's make it bigger, and I can copy the material name, and then I can paste it here into the node group. So it's called Magma Lava. And then let's hit the tab key to go into the node group. And if you go right over here to the group input, we can plug up values to the group input to control them outside of the node group. Let's also hit the N key to open up the side panel, and if we go to the group tab, we have the group sockets, so we have the shader and the displacement. So this mapping node is plugged up to all the textures, so this scale value is going to control the size of the entire material. So I'll put the scale into the extra socket. Let's click on the scale, and you can see it's going to be 3 values, but I just want it to be 1 value. So let's change the type from vector to float, and then I'll turn the default value to 1. And then if we hit tab to go out of the node group, let's turn the scale back to 1. So that'll control the size of the entire material. Let's go back into the node group. The next value that I want to control is the lava visibility. So I'm going to drag the group input over here, and we have this value from the hue saturation value that we can put into the extra socket. And I'll call this lava visibility. And then the next one that I want to control is the emission strength. So if I drag the group input down here, you can put the strength into the extra socket, and I'll just leave that as emission strength. Now also, if you want to, you could hit Shift D to duplicate the group inputs, and then you can move them around the scene and you can plug different things up to them. Some people like to do that. I personally just don't like to do that, because that way I'm just adding more and more nodes to the scene. But if you want to, you could definitely duplicate the group input and put it in different areas and then just plug the values up to the extra sockets, but I'm not going to do that. So the next value that I want to add is the different colors. So if we drag the group input right down here, so let's just add color A and color B into the extra sockets, and then I'm just going to rename this to lava color 1, and then this one is going to be lava color 2, and then hit Alt P to bring it out of the frame. Let's take the roughness here of the lava, and we'll put that into the extra socket too, and I can rename this to lava roughness. And then I want to control the bump strength, so let's take the strength value of the bump, put that into the extra socket, and then this one I'll rename to lava bump strength. Now I want to control a bunch of the different texture settings, so I'll drag the group input up here. So the first one that I want to control is this linear light factor, because that's distorting it. So I'll put the factor into the extra socket, and I'll just rename this to texture distortion. Then I want to control the detail. So this Voronoi texture has a detail, so I'll put the detail into the extra socket, and this I'll rename to texture detail. Then I want to control the texture roughness. So we'll take the roughness of the Voronoi, put that into the extra socket, and this one I'll rename to texture roughness. And then let's take this top noise texture, and we're going to put the lacunarity and also the distortion into these extra sockets. And then on the side panel, we can rename them to texture lacunarity and texture distortion. So now we have the rock settings, so I'll hit Alt P to bring it out of the frame. Let's just drag it up here. And we have the rock color, so we'll take the rock base color, put that into the extra socket, and this one I'll rename to rock color. Then we have the roughness value, so put that into the extra socket and call this rock roughness. And then we have the bump strength, so I'll put the strength into the extra socket, and I'll rename this to rock bump strength. And then finally, we have the displacement strength. So I'll drag the group input down here, and let's put the displacement, let's put the scale into the extra socket from the displacement, and this I'll rename to displacement strength. So I'll drag the group input right up here. Let's hit the N key to close the side panel, hit tab to go out of the node group. So here's the finished material, but I am also going to really quick do some compositing. So let's hop over to the compositing workspace, and you can click on use nodes. You can also Control Shift select the render layers to preview it. And then I want to add a glare node, so search for a glare in the compositor. Let's drop it here. And then also in my compositing view, I have the 3D viewport right here. So I will go into the rendered viewport mode. And then if you scroll right over here, you can click on the drop down and turn the compositor to always. So you can see the compositor in the viewport. So let's just preview the glare. And I'm going to turn the streaks to bloom. I'll turn the quality to high, and I'll turn the strength up to 4. So it's really bright. But then the size here, I'll just turn to like a 0.2. So it's a bit smaller. And that strength might be actually a little bit too much, so maybe I'll turn this strength down to like a 3. And then I can also change the tint. So I'm going to make the tint like this bright orangey color. And then if you want to add a background, what you can do is just search for an alpha over and drop this here, and the image can go into the image, and then this image from the glare can go into the bottom image of the alpha over, and then this image can be the background color. So I'm just going to make it fully black so you can really see the material glowing. So just like that. So now what I can do is just jump back over here to the shading workspace, and we can just scroll right over here, click on the drop down on the viewport shading, and we'll change the rendered viewport compositing to always so we can see the compositing, so we can see that glare. So there's the final material. So I'll just review the material. So we have the overall scale. We also have the lava visibility. We also have the emission strength. And if it's a little bit laggy in the scene, what you can do is go here to the modifiers and just click on this monitor icon to hide the subdivision surface, and that will kind of speed it up in the viewport, but then it will still render with the higher resolution. So then we have like the roughness of the lava, the bump strength, And then we have a bunch of different settings like the distortion, the detail, the roughness, the lacularity, and the distortion. So you can really play around with all these texture details to get some really cool variations. And then we also have the rock color. So I just have it as kind of like a red color to look like lava rock, the roughness of the rock, the bump strength of the rock, and then finally the displacement strength to pop out the mesh. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase this procedural material, you can get it with the links in the video description. You can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack if you'd like to purchase all of my materials. And to learn how to create more materials, you can check out my Blender Procedural Material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.